Welcome to the Clearly Christian Podcast with Dr. Cy Smith. It's time to know more so you can say no more. It's time for the Clearly Christian Podcast. Here's your host, Dr. Cy Smith.
I'm Dr. Cy Smith, and this is Clearly Christian, a podcast about what it means to see the world from a biblical frame of reference, or God's perspective, and then the impact this has on training the next generation to live a life consistent with the biblical worldview. If you've been listening and you like what you hear, I hope you'll hit the subscribe button, leave a review. That'll let others know the show is worth checking out and listening to, and it'll help spread the word and serve our mission to make a difference. So again, thank you for being here, and thank you for helping us advance the cause of Christian education. Today's extra credit version of the Clearly Christian Podcast is a deeper dive into our chalkboard points from our recent conversation with Dr. Dean Ritter. He's the head of school at Isaac Newton Christian Academy in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. We talked about spiritual formation and this idea of creating resilient disciples or disciplined resiliency. So now let's bring in our show's producer, Brian Lefelock, and let's speak a little bit about maybe some questions that you think the audience might have as they listen to this particular show. So Brian, what'd you think?
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating topic. It was a great program, and I'm always thinking about disciplined tactics, like if you're not disciplined, are you undisciplined? And if we work out and if we don't work out, like we're not helping ourselves by skipping those moments. So talk to me about discipline. I'm interested in the idea, disciplined resiliency, disciplined, and disciples. Do those two terms go together?
Yeah. Absolutely, and great question. Yep, sure. That certainly discipline has its root in the idea of disciple, because that's how I'm going to be disciplined. I've got to be a disciple of someone or something, and that's what a disciple does, right? I mean, if you use that, certainly that biblical analogy, those disciples that he had, those 12 disciples or apostles, as they're sometimes, they were living with him 24/7. They were learning to be like Christ, and so they were learning to be like him and think like him, to literally walk and talk and act like him. And so this is what it means to be a disciple of someone. You're disciplining your life around that. And so that's what this whole idea of spiritual disciplines are all about, and spiritual formations. What's the process for having that, like you said, that disciplined life? And training is a good analogy. You're not going to get those results in training without being disciplined. And you say, okay, well, what are the things that I need to put in place? I need to eat this and go to sleep then and drink this or whatever, but I have to be disciplined about this process to get results. Well, it's no different than your spiritual training as well. And that's really the point I tried to make in that last. It's not going to just happen. You don't just get saved and say, yes, I believe in Jesus and he died for my sins and things like that, and all of a sudden you get how to live as a believer. And it's about don't do this and don't do that and don't do this. That's not what the Christian life is all about, and that's not what we want to even communicate to the rest of the world. It's about what you get to do as a Christian. Well, what do I get to do as a Christian? Well, we're going to help teach you that. We're going to train you and say, this is how you get to live life as a Christ follower now. And these are some of the things that what it means to be a disciple. And some of these things are going to involve, disciplined training. And so that's how we kind of walk that out in this way. So, the two definitely go hand in hand.
And so if I'm trying my best and I'm training and I'm going to Christian school and things, and then I go home or somewhere else and society impacts me and maybe I'm not always disciplined, should we be disciplined more often, or should we be more disciplined during the times in training? What's the best way to make that work for our young people?
Yeah, more disciplined in the times of training and just right, and learning, because we're all fallible, we're all sin-natured, we're all going to make mistakes, and you're never going to be perfect, right? Our kids in Christian schools aren't perfect either, but yet how do we deal with that? And there's even some discipline with that as well. When our kids make mistakes here at MCS and in our homes and things, how do we respond? Well, we want to respond as Christ would respond, right? We want to correct that behavior, and then we want to restore them, because they have such tremendous value being created in God's image. So we want to point it out. Why is it wrong? Is it wrong just because it's in our handbook that says it's wrong? No, it's wrong because we know that this is not best for you, and God says it's wrong, and you need to learn why it's right. And then we want to help walk you through that and really work on that heart change, because when you really change your heart, then you desire to do the right thing. You don't just say, well, I'm going to do the right thing because I don't want to get in trouble. Right? That's a very elementary way to think. you got to mature through that, right? Because that won't serve you well as an adult. You want to do the right thing because it's best for you and others, and this will help you be successful.
It kind of becomes a habit too, and when you train and train and train, then you almost miss it when you're not doing it. I'm interested. Exactly. Dr. Ritter talked a lot about spiritual formation and teachers. Of course, that's what his excellence is. At MCS, you have to staff the classroom with teachers. They can't all come from a Christian higher education background. Some were, and many probably, from public education. How do you develop your teachers there to have that spiritual formation, or to be able to kind of transfer it over to the students?
Yeah, and you're exactly right. And because we have found, I've been doing this for over 30 years, and so some people come in with some of that background. They went to a K-12 Christian school, so they've maybe been trained there, but most do not. They went to a public school, K-12, they went to a public college, and maybe they came to Christ as a young believer. They came to know the Lord 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, but they've never been trained that how do I do math, language arts, science, art even, all these humanities. How do I do that from a biblical worldview? And you're exactly right. I don't have the training for that presentation. I think like that, but I've never been trained to communicate the subject like that. And so, we have to be very proactive about all the professional development that we do to pour into them and give them that training. So we're giving them resources constantly, and it's not optional resources. It's not like, here's read a book over the summer or something like that. That's one of about 100 things that we need you to do, right? But we also have a plan not only for our kids, but also for the teachers to say, as a matter of fact, I lead them every Monday morning from 7:30 to 8 in a biblical worldview study on exactly what you just talked about. And so they meet, all 75 teachers, 80 teachers get into a room with me every Monday morning for 36 weeks out of the school year. And I kind of walk them through this process using books and articles and resources and training and things like that. Then, of course, most of our professional development is molded around this idea to make them better. And then, of course, now we're just so blessed in this digital age to have all those online resources at our fingertips to say, hey, you need to listen to this podcast. You need to read this. This is great math from a biblical worldview. This is great English from a biblical worldview. And there's lots of resources out there. So we're constantly pouring into them. And then, of course, like Dr. Ritter said, we've also designed a curriculum around some of those spiritual markers, as we call them. He called them benchmarks. We call them spiritual markers, where we say, hey, everything you're doing in this grade level is built around this spiritual marker of trust, let's say, in the junior high. So how can we do that academically in your classes? And so we've developed that, and they know in their scope and sequence and in their curriculum, hey, I've got to really tackle this spiritual marker, and here's how the school is going to help me do that. So we have to flesh that out for them and walk them through it, but we have to be super, super intentional at a Christian school.
Give me an example, Dr. Smith, because Dr. Ritter talked about an example in school where the kids were talking about how will we find God as we study the respiratory system, and they came up with some amazing insights as to what they should expect. He also talked about truth, 2 + 2 = 4, not 5, and it got me to thinking, what's it like to teach math in a Christian school? Like, is it different than the way you teach math in a public school?
Yeah, it's a great question, and believe it or not, and everybody will probably believe it, that's always the subject that everybody brings up and says, I just fail to understand how you can do that Christianly. Because as he talked about, 2 + 2, and he noticed all those words were a B, right? He said Beijing and Boston and Berlin.
Yeah,
that was
great.
great.
A great moment.
That was good, right? And so
it's 2 + 2 = 4 in all of those places, no matter what.
All those places, right? So how in the world? Right. How in the world are you going to be able to do that from biblical worldview? Because I get that it's absolutely true, but isn't this going to be the same lesson from, XYZ school to this? And I would say the answer to that in math is certainly we have to even step back and say, and there are some biblical truths there that we have in writing, and I wish I could recall all of those things, but we have to always get to this point of, why does this make sense? Why is it true? Why is this so orderly? Because math is so precise. I mean, think back to your high school geometry class and you looked at those angles and you looked at, you're solving for the unknown in algebra and all this stuff. And it's hard, right? I mean, most people find math, very, very challenging. And yet we are still able to figure it out. And God wants us to be able to figure it out. We have his mind. And so this works because he designed it like that. One of my favorite illustrations on this, and if you want to watch a great at home, watch that movie Hidden Figures. I don't know if you remember that, but that's about, those ladies who worked at NASA, I think back in the 40s and 50s. It's fascinating. It's a great movie, and it talks about how those women were able to use math to get John Glenn safely back to Earth. And they had to pore over the math. And here they had these brand new IBM computers that came out. And John Glenn, one great point in the movie says, I know what the computer said. I want to know what that lady said. And I'll trust her. And if she says the math works, then I'll give it a go and jump in that rocket. And I'll go out in space and know that I'm going to be safely returning to home because the math works. And that's such a great movie to talk about, man, why is math so important? Well, we use it all the time. And think of the advancements we've been able to make in this culture because the math works. And again, just like everything else, why does the math work? Because that's what God designed. That's how he planned it. You are going to make life better, and he wants you to think like that. How in the world does this boat stay afloat? I mean, why doesn't this ship sink in the ocean? Well, math will tell you why that works. And God designed it like all that stuff. He created the gravity. He created all the formulas. All we're really doing in math is discovering what he has already outlined to be true. We're just discovering what he already created for us. And it's just awesome. And the more you understand about math, the more you just appreciate God.
I remember when my kids were growing up, and I remember doing it too. Why do I have to learn this? I'm never going to use this calculus thing. I'm never going to use it, but maybe you just answered why we have to learn it, because it helps us to understand why and to want to know why. Last question, Dr. Smith. Dr. Ritter was talking a lot about outcomes. You said students just don't get it and go. You have to measure what came out. Now, it's almost, as we're recording this, it's almost graduation day in I'm sure your schools and many schools around. Looking back, how do you know you've done a good job? How do you look at those students that are crossing that line? And how do you know that you've instilled that biblical worldview in a satisfactory manner?
Yeah, and there are two ways, and, both have good value and upsides and downsides, and they're both not perfect, that's for sure. But they're definitely one, we do give them written assessments, and we do give them a survey at the end of those senior years, and as they get to be seniors, to say, have you really comprehended some of these things we've been trying to teach you? What are your views on this? What are your views on that? And we're not always looking for a right answer there and say, oh, this is the correct response. But we are working and looking for a spiritually mature response that says, yeah, I've given some thought to my biblical worldview on this issue or on this topic, and I know what this means. So they've been able to digest what we've been teaching. So we can see that in writing. But then also we're definitely looking for the anecdotal evidence. In other words, what are their desires? What are their habits? We're watching their life, of course. We're looking at, where do you want to go and what do you want to do with your life? Do you have that sense of mission and that purpose? So we're always talking with them, and they're talking with counselors, and we're talking with them even because we've gotten to know these kids, right? They're invested here. We know their families well. And so, man, if I go to we're graduating 50 to 60 kids a year. Listen, I probably go to 30 to 40 grad parties a year. Because that's what we get invited to. It's a lot, no doubt about it, but I love connecting with those families. Well, if I went to 30 and 40 graduation parties and I heard parents say, man, my child has no clue what they want to do with their lives. They're really lost. They're confused. They're this, that. A really depressed state of this. I'd be like, wow, okay, maybe we didn't pour enough into this child's sense of purpose and mission. And, what I like to hear, of course, is, hey, they're really excited about what God's calling them to do. And those things really speak well about, they probably got a lot of that training them at MCS. And so we definitely take those to heart and really are watching for two things there. What are they putting on paper? Yes, but also what are the habits and what are some of the desires that they have? at graduation. Well, thank you, Brian. Those have been good questions. And thank you again for joining me today on the Clearly Christian podcast. And I trust that now you know more about what Christian schools and Christian families are doing to train their children to be committed Christ followers. Again, if you like the show, help us spread the word. Hit the subscribe button, leave a review, and let others know, again, the show is worth checking out. It would make a difference to me, and we would certainly appreciate that. Remember, the only way we're going to turn things around in our country is by increasing the number of people who hold that biblical worldview and live it out. And the greatest hope we have to get there is Christian education. Thank you again.
Thank you for listening to the Clearly Christian podcast with Dr. Cy Smith. Hear more episodes at clearlychristianeducation.com. If you'd like more information about Christian education in your neighborhood, or if you're interested in education opportunities at Mansfield Christian School, or if you agree with Dr. Smith and want to help him in his mission to influence and awaken Christian America, you can send Dr. Smith an email through the clearlychristianeducation.com website. Message him on the Clearly Christian LinkedIn or Facebook page, or call the Clearly Christian Connection line at 419-756-5651. This has been the Clearly Christian Podcast with Dr. Cy Smith on clearlychristianeducation.com, brought to you in conjunction with Mansfield Christian School, a Bryan Media production.